Welcome to Where Her Heart Speaks, a show designed to challenge and disrupt ineffective thoughts and behaviors to help you not only embody peace, joy, calm, and certainty, but also to help you live the life you've always dreamed of living. Where Her Heart Speaks with Coach Catherine begins now.
Many have heard the term hurt people, hurt people. And oftentimes, when we hear this phrase or quote, we think of it in terms of people who are suffering, people who have or are experiencing pain, people who are going through some things, people who are likely more angry, likely more dysregulated, likely not in their rational brains and unable to make rational decisions in the moment. We think of it in terms of people who are numb or disconnected, and in terms of adults who are hurting adults. But this week, I want to look at this from a different angle. I want to look at this from a different perspective. Hi there. Welcome and welcome back to Where Her Heart Speaks. I'm international speaker, best-selling author, and your host, Coach Catherine James. This week, I will be talking about something that has been on my heart for quite a while: trauma responses and parenting. Now, before we dive in, as always, I want to remind you that some of this conversation can be triggering. And if at any time you begin to feel uncomfortable, be sure to take care of yourself. And now that taking care of yourself can look like pausing to center and bring yourself back into the present. And as I've shared in the past, a great exercise or a great way to do this is for you to simply stop, scan your environment, and identify three things that you see, three things that you hear, and three things that you feel. That feeling can be either internally or externally. Another way is for you to slow your breath by inhaling to a count of 5, pausing for a count of 1, and exhaling to a count of 5, pausing at a count of 1, and then repeating the process at least 5 times. If you remain triggered, discontinue or pause your listening for a later time, or no time at all. What's most important is that you take care of your needs. Take care of your needs. Now, also, I want to just say stop what you're doing, stop listening right now. Grab yourself a pen and paper. Also, take a moment to invite anyone who you know who is a parent to listen to this episode. This episode is life-changing and life-giving. And if you've not yet subscribed to the show, be sure to do so. So, as we think about the phrase, hurt people, as I said, I want to look at it from a different angle. I want to look at it from an angle of people who parent little people. People who parent little people hurt people too. One of the biggest obstacles I come across when I'm helping women to identify the origins of their pain, to help them identify the internal stories and the behaviors that no longer serve them, one of the biggest obstacles is them not wanting to make their parents wrong, them not wanting to or feeling guilty about placing ownership of what they're going through on their parents. And I want to be really clear that identifying the origins of our pain, identifying the internal stories, identifying the behaviors has absolutely nothing to do with placing ownership on the parent or placing blame on the parent. It has nothing to do with that. And it has everything to do with identifying the origins of our pain, identifying how we became to be the people that we are, and how we became to have the beliefs that we have, how we became to have the patterns and the behaviors that we have. So, looking at it from a different angle, hurt people, yes. And hurt parents hurt their children. And this hurt may not necessarily be a physical hurt, but it can also be a mental hurt. It can be an emotional hurt. And we just have to think about people who are emotionally unavailable. People who are emotionally unavailable for themselves. People who are emotionally unavailable for themselves can't be emotionally available for anyone else, right? I just want to pause right there. If we are emotionally unavailable for ourselves, how is it that we can teach others to be emotionally available? It's impossible. And I'll just say, as we look at this from another angle, people who hurt people are hurting themselves. Parents who hurt their children are hurting themselves. Maybe another way to say this would be wounded parents create wounded children. Yeah, we are living in some tough times right now. During these times, based on a report that I recently came across from American Psychological Association, it said that 75% of Americans recently experienced symptoms of stress. 75%. And this was a recent report. And even more recently, just last week, there was an article from CNBC that said burnout is on the rise. And the unfortunate thing, or fortunate, I don't know if it's one way or the other. I mean, when we're talking about burnout, I don't know that it can be fortunate. But what I think was concerning is it said those who are the most affected, those who are the greatest affected, and the most stressed are those in the Gen Z generation, young millennials, and women. So Gen Zers, young millennials, and women are those who are most stressed and have been greatly impacted, or those who are experiencing burnout the most. And that's concerning because if we think about it, it's these individuals who are likely raising small children. It's these individuals who have children. And the question becomes, what's their availability for those children? If you are burned out, what is your availability for those children? As I said earlier, if we are unavailable for ourselves, the likelihood of being available for our children is little to none. And I would say that it didn't just start in, and it didn't just start in, I'm going to say, their adult lives. And I'm going to take myself and use myself as an example. I know in my own life, I spent a number of years where I was burned out. I dealt with functional depression. There was a number of years where I didn't realize, even though I was doing my best, I was doing the best that I could to give my children a great life. I didn't realize, I didn't know what it meant to be emotionally unavailable. I didn't know that was my story. I didn't realize and I didn't know what it meant to be mentally unavailable. And I had absolutely no idea that it was affecting my children, that it was teaching them and creating internal narratives that they weren't important, they weren't worthy, they weren't valued. Was that my goal? Absolutely not. When I started out on my parenting journey, my goal was to ensure that my children had everything I did not have. Like, does that sound familiar? Hmm. Yeah, that was my goal. I wanted to make sure that they had everything that I didn't have. Now, the funny thing about that is all that I could identify in terms of what I didn't have were the tangible things. I grew up in a household where I heard things like money didn't grow on trees and I am not B of A. I heard things like we can't afford that. So for me, there was scarcity. And when I got age of thinking about having children, one of the things I said was that I wanted to make sure my children didn't have to experience that. I wanted to make sure that I gave them all the things that I didn't have. Here's the funny thing, because I had no idea that providing for my children extended beyond tangible things, that's where I got caught up. That's where I got caught up. And all that I could identify were the tangible things. Primarily lack of knowledge, but also because I was still hurting. And because I was still hurting and I didn't know I was hurting, I didn't know the origin or the reason for my pain. I really couldn't identify that I was even in pain or name it. I just knew some things were off. The things that I didn't have, the tangible things, were the things that I made to mean something, that I believed would provide a better life for my children. And so I set out to make sure, to ensure that they had a life that was rich in tangible things. Now, I know that this is not just my story. So I would ask you to identify yourself. If that sounds familiar to you, identify yourself. So I thought that I was giving them all the love that I could give, which at the time was the truth. I did. At that time, that was all that I had that I could give. Is it who I am today? No, absolutely not. But again, back then, I thought that as long as I was taking care of them in terms of giving them what they needed, showing up to their events, being present physically, like going to the parent teacher meeting, serving on PTA, all of that, as long as I was doing that, making sure they had dinner, making sure they had nice clothes, as long as I was doing that, I was being a great parent. But what I didn't understand was that parenting is so much more than transactions and box checking. Parenting is so much more than giving from a tangible standpoint. What I came to understand, parenting to have emotionally healthy children is much more. It's much more about giving from an emotional standpoint. It's much more about being emotionally available. But how? How can anyone be emotionally available? How can you be emotionally available for your children if you're not emotionally available for yourself? Suppression. The number of women I get to work with that have learned that suppressing their emotions is a strength is unreal. How do we be there for our children when we're unavailable for ourselves emotionally, or we're emotionally immature? Emotionally immature. Everything is about them. Everything is a big deal. Like there is no room for your child to emote. There's no room for the child to have space to express how they're feeling when everything is about the parent, when everything is a big deal. And I believe that this is why when children grow up, we later hear parents saying things like they can't get their children to talk to them or their children are so angry. Why? Because the children have learned that emoting is either unsafe or there's no space for their emotions. So they too have come to suppress or learn to suppress, or conversely, they let out all of their bottled up rage or make space where they feel there's no space for their emotions. And here's the deal, whichever behavior we witness, it's a symptom or a response related to a deeper problem. And when we are parenting from our own trauma responses, from our own associated stories, we lack the ability to be curious about our child's behavior. And for many, the child's behavior is internalized and personalized, like the parent looks at the child behavior, and instead of becoming curious, instead of wondering what happened to my child, should let me explore and find out why this behavior is what it is. When we're stuck in our own trauma responses, we internalize that, we personalize it, and we take that child's behavior and make it to mean something within us. That then triggers the parent and activates the parent's fight or flight response. Now the parent is lashing out, acting out. In my case, I would get silent. I grew up in a household where there was yelling. I, again, didn't want to raise my children the way that I was raised. I wanted to give them something different. So when my children did something that triggered me, I got silent, thinking that I was doing better because I wasn't yelling. But guess what? Silence hurts just as much as yelling. And what happened? The child is wounded even further. It causes further wounds. So parenting through or from trauma responses, I believe it leads to different types of parenting styles. And these are some things that I've been thinking about and a program that I'm working on. These are a few of the areas that I will be covering, but I think it leads to performance-based parenting. Performance-based parenting. Performance-based parenting is like when parents are telling their child, if you do this, I'll do that. Or, well, you didn't wash the dishes, so I'm not going to give you lunch money. You didn't take out the trash, so I'm not going to take you to the store. And it teaches the child that they are only valued when they are performing in a manner that pleases the parent. Huh. Can we just say people pleaser in the making? We wonder, like, how do we become people pleasers? Where does that actually come from? It starts early in life. Oftentimes it's unconscious and we have no idea that it's happening because it's before our cognitive reasoning even sets in, before our cognitive reasoning is even developed, fully developed. Then we have the child in this performance-based parenting, the child who appears perfect from the parent's perspective. This child is perfect because she does everything right, and I want you to know that right is in air quotes. everything right in the parent's eyes, um, I would venture to say that the child may have developed people pleasing as a trauma response to gain acceptance and acknowledgement. Yeah, that's something to think about. And another type of parenting that comes as a result of parenting from trauma responses, I think, is transactional based parenting. Transactional based parenting, simply checking the boxes. There's plenty of financial support. If I look back at my earlier years of parenting, it was transactional based parenting. Like I was going to be at every parent teacher conference, I was going to be at every sporting event, I was going to make sure that the kids went to bed on time, simply checking the boxes. Plenty of financial support, very little emotional support. Even during my times where I wouldn't speak, and if I just out myself and be fully transparent with you, sometimes that went on for days where I was silent. Even during those times, I was still going to show up. I was going to be present physically because I thought that was the thing to do. I didn't know that emotionally, an emotional presence was far more important than a physical presence. But when there's just in this transactional based parenting, what happens with the child is the child learns that they have to stay out of the way, that the parent is busy, and they also learn that they're not important and they don't matter. And we see this in children who appear to be highly self-sufficient and stays to themselves. Those children may have learned to isolate, take care of themselves, become more independent as trauma responses to cope with their lack of emotional support. Another type of parenting that comes as a result of parenting through trauma responses is generational based parenting. Generational based parenting. I like to think of this as those things that we got from the generations before us. Sayings like, because I said so. That feeling unspoken, but that the parent was domineering over the child, condescending comments. Maybe that wasn't your generation or the generations before you, but that was mine. That was my experience. And I have come to see it as the experience of so many of the women that I work with. So, and what generational based parenting does is it teaches the child that they're unworthy of being treated well. So, children who acquiesce, don't speak their minds, defer to others, may have learned, I call it a trauma response called go along to get along. They've learned that trauma response in hopes of being liked. So, we all have something that I like to call safety net behaviors. Safety net behaviors, like a safety net, they catch us and they save us when we're faced with either real or perceived danger. These behaviors, they're automatic and oftentimes they are automatically and unconsciously established early in life. Early in life, when we have very limited cognitive resources and the meaning of many of life's experiences are created or is created from our emotional brain and physiological feelings, the feelings that the things that we feel in our body. And I just want you to imagine two children playing together, both vying to have their way, have their own needs and wants met, both wanting to feel safe, wanting to be seen, and wanting to be loved. What do we get? Now, over the last 24 hours, I've been caring for two 5-month-old puppies. Both my son and I have puppies, and I am babysitting his dog. So I've been caring for these puppies, and I am just amazed at how much they act like toddlers. And even more so, I'm amazed at how I'm treating them like toddlers. Like, I find myself talking to them, like telling them over and over not to eat one another's food, not to take one another's toys, to stop bothering the other one when one doesn't want to play, just on and on. And what I see here is that they have no capacity to think of what the other may want or desire. Like, they have no capacity to consider what the other may be feeling. It's just not within their container. The containers that they have is only big enough to address their own needs. I would venture to say that the container of wounded parents only has the capacity to address the parents' needs, even well-meaning parents. And it's not until the wounds are healed will they have the emotional capacity to address the emotional needs of their children, to see the emotional needs of their children. Understanding the effects of trauma was one of the greatest gifts I've ever received. It allowed me to let go of my parental guilt and expectations. It allowed me to release blame and embrace compassion and mend broken relationships. Things aren't perfect today, but what I can say is that I understand why I was parented the way I was. I understand why I parented the way I did. And I can have compassion. I can have compassion for my parents. I can have compassion for my children. And let me be clear, understanding and awareness was only the first step. You see, I had to identify my wounds. I had to name my wounds. I had to go through a process of healing those wounds. And after years of going through my process, and now years of coaching other women through their process, I've come to know that not only do wounded parents create wounded children, but healed parents create healed children. Mm. Yeah, that just feels good in my soul. Like that just caused me to pause for a minute. That feels good in my soul. Healed parents raise up healed children. And if we look at it in terms of a domino effect, those healed children then become healed parents who raise up healed children who become healed parents. We could change the whole world by simply healing our wounds and raising up healed children. Imagine what could happen if you took the first step and then the next step and the next step and the next until you reached a place of having healed your wounds, until you reached a place of being able to have compassion for those that you love. Imagine what could happen. This is my prayer for you. And my quote this week, as I am being careful to share a quote, a woman's quote in honor of Women's History Month, a quote from a woman. My quote this week comes from myself, and it simply says that every day you are allowed to open your eyes is another opportunity for you to become the woman that you were created to be. Every day is another opportunity. If you are ready to take your first step, and you've been wondering maybe, like, I know that something's off. Maybe I can't name it. Maybe you can't name it. Maybe you don't quite understand it. Or maybe you do. But you've not yet known where to go to get help in taking that first step. I want to invite you to go to www.calendly.com/Coach Catherine and schedule a free strategy session. Let's get on the path of changing the world by first changing ourselves, healing the world by first healing ourselves, raising up healed children, mending broken relationships by first healing ourselves. As I sign off, I want to remind you that in this life, we get to choose to live a sensational life. Peace and blessings.
Thank you for listening to Where Her Heart Speaks with Coach Catherine, where Catherine aims to challenge and disrupt ineffective thoughts and behaviors to help you not only embody peace, joy, calm, and certainty, but also help you live the life you've always dreamed of living. Follow Catherine on Facebook and Instagram at I Am Catherine James and visit www.catherinejames.com. Remember, to live the life of your dreams, you must go within and return to the place where your heart speaks.